Hello, my name is Tom and welcome to my channel, Integral Views. Firstly, a huge thank you to all my new subscribers. Thanks so much for subscribing to my channel and watching my long videos. Really appreciate it. So today I want to talk about what is centrism. So what does it mean to kind of be in a central point in politics? And also I want to provide definitions for what's far left and what's far right, because we hear the terms thrown around a lot, and I think it will be kind of good if we had a definition for both of those. So that's what I intend to do. There's a non-zero possibility that I might piss everybody off in this video, but we will see. I also have this feeling that a lot of people kind of agree with my positions, so maybe the majority of people do. There's obviously these extremes, right? But I'm not sure. So if you could let me know in the comments, I'm actually really interested to know what people think, what they agree with, don't agree with. Yeah, so let's get started. All right, so far left and far right. I think this is really important because we hear those terms all the time, right? And it's actually kind of theoretically quite easy to know what far right and far left means. It's just really far on either side, on the left or on the right. But what I think happens a lot of the time is that people move into these positions on the left further and further, and then to them what's very far away actually is quite centrist. It's actually not that far, right? You know what I mean? So effectively, from a certain perspective, if you're far enough out on one side or the other yourself, then it looks very far to where someone else's position is. And because people end up in these echo chambers, that happens more and more, which is why we hear these terms thrown about. I think it's so important, though, that we get an understanding of what it looks like these days. So let's start with Wikipedia, right? So let's bring up a couple of Wikipedia definitions, starting with far right. Far-right politics, often termed right-wing extremism, encompasses a range of ideologies that are marked by ultra-conservatism, authoritarianism, ultra-nationalism, radical anti-communism, and nativism. Okay, so that's the Wikipedia's definition of far-right. I don't think it's that bad. And then far-left politics. Far-left politics are politics further to the left on the political spectrum than the standard political left, obviously. In certain instances, especially in the news media, far left has been associated with various forms of authoritarianism, anarchism, communism, and Marxism, or are characterized as groups of that advocate for revolutionary socialism. I won't go through the rest of it. Anti-capitalism. It can be militant and insurgent. So I think from my point of view, right off the bat, there's so many similarities between the far right and far left. They are authoritarian in their nature, and they often kind of talk about violence, potentially, at any cost. We'll do this at any cost. So you see that on both the left and the right. And next, we're just going to have a look at a definition that I found after listening to a Guardian podcast. Okay, so as I've detailed in previous videos, I attended the Unite the Kingdom March, the Tommy Robinson March. It was Unite the Kingdom in London. And when I ended that at the end of the day, I think maybe it was the next day, I thought, because there was this real disconnect between how I experienced it and then how it was reported in the media afterwards. And I thought, okay, let me go and listen to The Guardian about, what they have to say about this to see how it's actually being reported. Anyway, long story short, right, so I did. I suffered through that. And it was this podcast, On the Ground with Tommy Robinson, new supporters. And within that, there was this guy who came in and he was talking to the host. And he said, senior reporter Ben Quinn, senior reporter from The Guardian, explains to Helen what exactly is meant by the term far right, why so many people find it toxic, and the particular ways it is and is not useful in this moment. I mean, I was listening to this, right, and I was thinking, wow, this is far out, this is out there, because we hear the term far right used so much, and you're always thinking, where are they getting this from? This is so bizarre. And so, yeah, this is where, right? So basically, this definition he gave in the podcast, I wrote it down, and then I went and Googled it, and I found the paper that it came from. And so let's look at this definition. The definition is a narrative of racial and or cultural threat to a native group arising from perceived alien groups within a society. And that's far right? That's crazy. So basically any perceived or narrative around native or cultural threat, if there's a cultural threat and it's a perceived cultural threat or a narrative of that, then it's far right by definition. That is so wide as to be completely meaningless, because it could apply to the left, it could apply, basically to pretty much anyone if they think there's a cultural threat, a perceived cultural threat from an alien group. Could even be aliens. So if aliens were attacking the Earth, you're far right if you think that's a cultural threat to the Earth. Complete nonsense definition, right? But at least the person who wrote that said the defining characteristic of the far right for this paper, then they said it, and then they said this is considered a working definition intended to bound this paper only. This should not be treated as comprehensive. And yet you got people from The Guardian taking that out of context and then distributing it as if it is a definition of far right out to hundreds of thousands, millions of people. I don't know if anyone listens to The Guardian anymore, but nevertheless, it just was like a really clear example for me that, this is where these people are getting this stuff from. It's out of context, it's meaningless, not thinking about it. Anyway, thought that was interesting to share. All right, so in trying to define this for myself, I think the Wikipedia definitions aren't bad. It's kind of difficult to get it across. I've done these definitions. I worked with GPT, refined it for a bit, and then came up with these definitions that I'm going to show up. I won't go through them in great detail. Effectively, though, on the far left, core goal: radical equality and dismantling of perceived oppressive structures. So they perceive all of this oppression, and then they'll say, any means necessary to take that down. Authoritarian, violence, it's all justified. Any means necessary to eradicate the world of this terrible perceived oppression, right? So Antifa are a great example. I think from my point of view, when it's important to not apply far left to basically everyone or too many people on the left, in the same way as done from the left to the right, when they call everything far right. So, if we say it's Antifa and maybe some of those kind of Zara Sultana, the Your Party gang, or her part, I don't know what it is. I don't know whose party it is. I don't think anyone knows whose party it is anymore. But anyway, so I think that there's elements there definitely that would fit this definition. Authoritarianism, fight to get this removed, this oppressive structure removed. And then on the right, I actually find this kind of easier to define personally. I think that it manifests, we'll just go through this. So radical hierarchy, tradition, cultural, national supremacy preserves or restores systems of inequality. So it actually enforces or restores systems of inequality. The thing is that the definition, how I would use it on the left and right, of inequality is different, right? So from the right, what I would see here as being said as inequality is actual oppressive, I'm going to treat you different because of your ethnicity, or I'm going to treat you different because of your gender or sex. And on the left, they perceive inequality as if you look across groups and there's any difference in outcome, then that is oppressive. That is inequality, right? So there's even problems with definitions of concepts that it's causing miscommunication. Anyway, on the right, the far right, I would say there's very strong elements of ethnonationalism and racism and sexism. So I'm just going to show up a few examples as I'm talking through this of ethno-nationalism online. I'm not going to read them, of course. It can be clipped or whatever, as if it's my view. I don't support it. That's not my mindset, but it is far right. And I think the people who espouse this stuff would even call themselves far right. So probably no argument there, right? I think that effectively racism is really big in it. I think that sexism is really a big element within it. I just want to whilst I'm doing this, actually, because I didn't before, I just want to show up on screen. Again, I'm not going to go through it because it's just crazy amount of stuff. But I'm just going to show up some examples of responses online to Charlie Kirk's, the shooting of Charlie Kirk. And online you saw all of these messages, these people, this outpouring of hatred from the left. And so I think that is a great example of far left behaviour. It's just unprincipled, it's, just hateful, basically. So I'm just editing the video, and I noticed that I didn't include something very important. So I wanted to include this. Have a look at this this tweet. And I want to say, by my definition, Tommy Robinson doesn't meet the threshold of what I would call far right. And I think that nor does the patriotism as displayed within the United Kingdom rallies. All right, as we start to go further, you'll probably see why I said at the beginning that I might end up just annoying everybody. Have you seen that meme, which is "you're all wrong"? I'll show it up on screen. So that's kind of how I feel like now. But maybe that's not true, right? Maybe a lot of people do actually kind of agree with me. I wouldn't be surprised if they did. I'd love to know, though, really would. So let's start with the issues that the left gets wrong. Where do I start? There's a lot, isn't there? Well, from my point of view, there certainly is a lot. I think that this image kind of to some extent does justice to how I feel. I feel like throughout my adult life, the left has gone further and further and further, and just completely moved into extreme positions overall. Not just the extreme left, but the left overall seems to have just embraced these extreme positions and then gone about manifesting them within society. So some examples. One thing that's absolutely clear from my point of view is that there has been culturally this kind of anti-male rhetoric that became very normalized within society through the left, basically. So it's just honestly, it just seems to be completely accepted, and it's anti-male rhetoric, it's misandry, and it's within institutions and just within society overall. Examples: Netflix fictional docudramas like Adolescence, promoted by virtue signalling ignoramuses, probably doing more harm than they are good, pushing young men further and further away from the kind of establishment, effectively, or what they view as the power structures. Replacing iconic male roles in movies. I think there's a place for it. Like, I wouldn't say, you can't replace male roles or characters with female, but I think it definitely got a little bit out of hand there, in my opinion. Endless news articles on toxic masculinity, mansplaining, and manspreading. The thing about manspreading is that there is actually a kind of need. There's a how do I put this? And this is the thing, it's difficult to talk about because you put men in a position where, like, I don't want to talk about that just with any old person. You know what I mean? Someone will say, manspreading's so bad, and then you have to talk to them about male biology. Hopefully I don't need to say any more about that. Hopefully that's clear. Of course there are extreme examples, but it's just really awkward and it's just really bad because, like, okay, teenage boys are going to hear that and think, I've got to, but that's uncomfortable, and what am I doing? I'm just a bad person or something. It's just a horrible thing for society to have done. Thank you, the left. Mansplaining. Again, I mean, like, come on. It's in my experience, to be completely honest, and it's N of one, subjective, but I have in my career I have had a lot of, I would say overall, I've had much more kind of outspoken, confident women that in my experience than men overall. So I think it's just another example of like you're not allowed to explain anything because you're a man. It's just a terrible thing to put out there. Toxic masculinity. I mean, come on, so bad, so broad. It's just sexism. Uncontrolled misandry online. So I'm going to put up some examples as I talk. Of course, I'm not going to go through these, but they're just examples. This is absolutely rife online. Maybe people aren't aware of it because they don't go to certain places on the internet. But yeah, a lot of comment sections, a lot of hashtags, really horrible hashtags, a lot of stuff that just goes on and you don't hear anything about it. We talk a lot about misogyny, and rightly, it shouldn't happen. But then how much are we talking about misandry? Basically not at all. Very little recognition of men's issues, from suicide to homelessness. I won't go on any more about that, but there's just no real recognition. The only thing young men hear is from the left. The only thing young men hear is you're toxic, don't explain anything, and all your characters you loved as are gone in Marvel and wherever else, and it's just such a terrible message, ridiculous. And then the left goes, men are bad, men are toxic, men are terrible, non-stop, every day, in adverts, in culture, in schools, in talks, on just all the time, even in the House of Commons. And then they go, oh, why aren't men voting for the left anymore? So it's like, it shouldn't be a mystery. All right. Okay, now I can kind of rant for quite a long time about these issues, but I'll just go through a bunch more for the left, right? And the reason that these are so clear in my mind is, this has been the last decade or however long, and it's just such a shame because I feel like I was just abandoned by the left politically. Anyway, so let's go through some more examples, right? Identity politics. Just this endless focus on immutable characteristics, as if that's, actually helpful. Let's just focus endlessly on immutable characteristics. Cancel culture in public. It's just so bad. Often very subjective, often completely unjustified. Speech policing, absolutely. Microaggressions, right? So that's another thing. Radical gender ideology, the whole trans movement, for me is just it's just a load of nonsense in my opinion. And then maybe I should be a bit more nuanced. I think that of course people can have different feelings about themselves, but expecting other people to align with that and to make believe that something is true when it's not true is clearly not a good thing to do in society. Okay, hopefully that was a bit more clear. Equity versus equality, I already spoke about that. Critical race theory and DEI, that's another one. It's more relativism coming in. DEI standards, basically applying these immutable characteristics within hiring and just overall as if that's a good thing. It's actually racism and sexism by a different name, so I reject it. Revisionist history, so then looking at history and seeing like, oh, it's all colonialist, and only looking at history through a certain predetermined lens instead of taking the full balance of accounts and full balance of events into account. Safe spaces, infantilizing of adults as if they need to be kept away from anything that's not completely in agreement with their point of view. Words of violence, grow up. Virtue signaling, endless virtue signaling. People just saying the current thing, especially celebrities in Hollywood, cringe. Policing of comedy and art. Nothing can be funny anymore because no one's allowed to get offended. Unbelievable. All right, so I'm nearly done. So pretty long list, really. They messed up pretty bad. Net zero extremism is another one. So I think that effectively other solutions exist. So I'm not saying, I'll come to it when I talk about centrism, but effectively there's this extremism where it's like a religion, basically. This net zero is like some kind of moral crusade. It ceases being rational. I think a lot of this stuff is a replacement for religion, honestly. Anyway, right, let's move on to how the right goes wrong. Okay, actually, I'm still not done with the left. So, another thing, hierarchies of victimhood. They built this whole hierarchy, like a caste system of victimhood. And then they implement it institutionally. Madness, come on. Ridiculous. Then this open border insanity that's happening, where, in America and here, it's like you're racist if you don't allow complete open borders. With no checking and no control and no matter the consequences. And even though if everybody came, millions and millions or hundreds of millions of people, then it would completely destroy our society and our nation. We're not set up for that globally yet. It's just another completely pie-in-the-sky, fantastical, some kind of moral, crusade or something that is completely unworkable and fantastical. So all of that really is based on this postmodern relativism that I spoke about in my last video. And it's all kind of within this umbrella of equality of outcome. That's how it's all justified. Now we can get on to the right. Okay, so this is a shorter list. And I think it is because a lot of the stuff that the right has got wrong and what goes on the right is already pretty well documented in history. And actually a lot of the stuff on the left to a certain extent within communism, etc. But let's go through it. So on the right, what I see is, and I spoke about it already, is ethnonationalism and racism. And of course, this should not be downplayed. It is rising, without a doubt, because of the failures and the insanity on the left. The right is now emboldened and the Overton window is moving. And people who have these ethno-nationalist and racist views, they feel kind of emboldened to be able to express them. So I provided a few examples of this already, but I think the thing is we can't be naive in thinking that this isn't a massive issue. It's a very big issue, and I think the right needs to be aware of it and shut it down, set that boundary very clear. I can see people going, starting who are on the right, and then they kind of go further and further and further and further, and you can see how these things, they're simplistic solutions, right? And they're emotional as well. So when people are angry about the situation they're in, they want somewhere for that anger to go. And that is really the case on the far left and the far right. So racism. The left has its own version of racism, by the way, that it's implementing. Absolutely. Now, I come at this issue of racism from a rational standpoint, as well as moral, of course. But I think that ultimately it is completely cognitively incoherent to, on the one hand, be saying, talking about ethnic purity, but then be completely oblivious to the fact that a lot of the really bright minds on the right are not Caucasian, as a lot of the people who are the ethno-nationalists are, right? So some examples. Suella Braverman. Suella Braverman created the Illegal Immigration Act of 2023, the closest we ever came to dealing with the Illegal Immigration Act issue. She's currently working on ideas to move us out of the ECHR. Ben Habib, who leads the Advance UK party, really, really bright guy and really strongly patriotic. Kemi Badenoch, you might not agree with her. You might not think that she's exactly right, but she's certainly conservative. And I think that she's, from what I've been watching, I think that she's taking the right steps and doing it in my opinion. So I'm actually kind of a fan of Kemi. I think she's made some mistakes. Anyway, I won't go into it now. Trevor Phillips. Trevor Phillips is somebody, he was like the only person who was bold enough to any extent to report getting close to accurately about the Unite the Kingdom rally. Okay, so then sexism and anti-female rhetoric overall. Andrew Tate is a great example of this. While I talk through this, I'm going to put up on the side of the screen over here, I'm going to put up a bunch of Andrew Tate's quotes and things that he said about women, and so you can read them. Of course, I'm not going to say them, but effectively, you know, it is this really kind of, I don't know, it's like this really restrictive view of women and also men. It's like men are like this, like that, and then women are like that, and they're always just like that, and it's like really closed in and restrictive and simplistic and negative. I think that it's harmful and it's not good that boys, young men would consume that kind of information and then agree with it. So I think this is an example of, you know, where the right goes very wrong. To a lesser extent, there is this deeply conservative view around male and female roles, not as extreme as Mr. Tate, but just overall there's this much more conservative view of you should do this and you should do this, and it doesn't matter what you want to do because that's your this and that's that. And I think that goes a bit far, right, on the right, in my opinion. For me, too far. And then another thing that the right does wrong, in my opinion, is this kind of worshipping, to a extent, not everybody, but this worshipping of free market capitalism. So it's basically like this idea that if you just remove all the regulations and you just allow economics to play out, then it's all going to be fine and it'll all sort itself out. No, it won't. Definitely won't. The nature of money, the nature of capital and liquidity is that it pulls like gravity, and it always pulls and pulls, and stronger, the more capital you have, the more it attracts to it, and that's the way that it acts, right? So there is a balance. The balance is having enough free market access to allow for economic activity to take place, not too much restrictive regulation, but there is an element of having to rebalance. Think about AI, right? When AI comes about, takes all the jobs from everybody, all the money's going to the AI companies, free market capitalism is like, okay, well, you have fun and nothing for the rest of us, all good, right? So obviously not right, and you see that on the right quite a lot, right? Deeply conservative views about that restrict gender roles. I've already spoken about that. I think that it's basically a genuine problem. I mean, the thing is, like, what I spoke about adolescence being a bad, not a bad thing overall, and I think it is a bad thing overall, but that's not to say that we shouldn't address and be conscious of what young boys are consuming and how they're kind of growing up, right? So failure to accept global issues and global solutions, for example, climate change, pandemics. All right, so a lot of, I mentioned AI just now, but basically a lot of the issues that we have are global in nature. I believe that climate change, human caused climate change, is real. Of course, the climate has changed a lot in the past. And yes, it was much, much warmer at other times when the dinosaurs were around. The lizards, I mean, come on, they're warm-blooded, so whatever. Like they can deal with the heat. They're cold-blooded. Cold-blooded is what I meant. So yeah, they love it, but we don't love it so much. And so it is a problem, right? Scientifically, we know overall, like, the evidence is in, how much we contribute, whatever. I think it is an issue. We should, either way, get control of the climate, right? Would be pretty cool if we could do that. But then, there's this complete denialism of climate change on the right, and I'm not comfortable with that. I'll get into what my views a bit more and when I talk about what actually makes a centrist, in my opinion. But there's other things. So on the right, they hate global institutions, and I can understand why, because they're undemocratic. But the thing is, like, you can't just completely reject global institutions and global solutions, because there are global problems. So yeah, maybe we reform them and we make them more democratic and accountable and transparent, right? But like, we do need these global institutions to set global standards. I'll give you an example, right? So in a free trade, no trade rules, no UN, no countries coming together and being kind of restricted at all by any kind of international law. Well, then let's say the UK's out on its own, yeah? Well, like, imagine then that Russia's like, hey, look at the UK. They look a bit vulnerable now, that island over there. To China, right? Russia's like, maybe we should take care of them. Maybe we should, take everything that they've got. Maybe we should just, take advantage of them. And then China's like, sounds like a good plan. Let's do it. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? We can't do anything. So we need these global cooperation structures, right? So it's one thing for Trump and the United States, who've got the biggest military in the world, to act like that, but we certainly can't. Other issues on the right, from my point of view, I find also the right falls into these conspiracy theories. There is this thread on the right, which is conspiratorial. And of course, conspiracies do exist. Many are proven right over time. The lab leak, COVID-1 and others, right? But there's this kind of tendency to believe that the world is, controlled by strings by a group of people that are smart enough to understand all of it, and just playing it all out like it's some kind of matrix thing. And Andrew Tate talks about that as well. And you know why I think this is? It's because it's a really simple answer. It's like, actually it's way more scary if no one knows what the hell's going on. And it's just like chaos, and people doing what they can within that chaotic situation. Of course, there's corruption, there's collaboration, there's stuff we don't know about, but I don't think there's a master plan with, these groups that are smart enough to know everything that's going to happen. I don't think that that's true. So that's another thing that I see going wrong on the right. Okay, next we're going to get into what a centrist position actually is from my point of view. Okay, so what is a centrist position from my point of view? This is a work in progress, so I'd love feedback. This is kind of like, this is my point of view around what centrism is right now. So first of all, and I wish I didn't have to cover this, but I do, with regard to women and men really, but because it's spoken about on the right and there's this tendency, I wanted to address it directly. So there are differences between men and women, right? Often on the left you see there's no difference, there cannot be any difference, and you even see that going completely crazy, where you even see male boxers beating up women on the global Olympic stage and everyone's cheering like yay. Absolutely ridiculous. But then on the right, you got this whole thing of like, women are this and they have to stay here and do what I say, which is equally toxic. So there are differences. So you might get differences in outcome, differences in choice. That's absolutely fine. Don't force the same result because they're different. Of course, it's a sliding scale, right? Some women want to do this, some women want to do that, some men want to do this, some men want to do that. It's a scale. Why is it so hard? Anyway, so so they have that kind of centers of gravity though, and they'll be, on average, they'll be more kind of, you can characteristically say that they have different characteristics. Of course, women and men should have the freedom and the rights, right, to basically live their life as they see fit, but not force others to adhere to their beliefs. And then economics. So what's the centrist position on economics, in my opinion? Complete and unregulated free market capitalism causes unsustainable wealth inequality. I spoke about that already. The UK has a major welfare problem, which makes the system unfair. So we do have a massive productivity problem in the UK because we have huge amounts of people on welfare who could be working. That's my view on it. And then wealth taxes will not work, as often described by the far left. So the far left often say, oh, well, we just do wealth taxes, just take away all the money from the people who got the money and then give it to everybody else, just spread it all out equally. I think that's just completely unfair, because some people produce more, they're more active, and they deserve to have more. They earn. If you think about it, like in terms of a lion in a pride, they go and get the food, and then it would be really weird if there are all these other little prides and they're like, oh well, everyone gets the same, but there's only one lion doing all the work, or just a few of them. It's about fairness. But so I reject this whole wealth inequality thing. Some things can be done. Maybe you could do. I reject the wealth taxes thing, not wealth inequality. Wealth inequality is an issue. It's a global issue. We need global solutions. If we have a free market capitalist environment globally, then of course nations are going to be competing against each other with their tax policy. It's just the nature of the system. So if you apply wealth taxes to a large extent, it's completely naive to believe that you won't see capital flight, because you actually absolutely will. People say, oh well, the buildings are here. Yeah, but their value is derived from the strength of the economy. So there are entire industries that are built around maximization of capital returns, wealth management, asset management. Those businesses, those entire industries staffed with very well paid, very smart people are designed, and they work constantly to maximize return on capital. So nonsense on the left on that front. Climate change is real, but that does not require the destruction of our economy. So my view on climate change, and I think the centrist position potentially, you tell me, right, is that climate change is real. Humans contribute to it, but it doesn't mean that we have to go full bore into these Ed Miliband net zero insane projects of carbon capture, etc., and destroy our economy when China, India, Russia, you name it, growing economies don't seem to give a crap whatsoever, and so they're going gangbusters, and we're just losing out. I think actually the solution to climate change will come through AI. So an argument could be made that the best thing to do on climate change is to drill baby drill and get that energy, and then fund AI, use it to fuel AI that will solve things like fusion for us, fusion power, and then we can actually come out of that. The only way out is through. We're not going to get a situation before climate change actually really becomes an issue. We're not going to get everybody powered by windmills and solar panels. It's completely insane to think that we will. Take a look at China. Take a look at India. What are you thinking? People aren't going to look at the UK and go, oh, that's a great model. They're going to look at the UK and go, look how expensive your energy is and look how much your economy's failing. We definitely don't want to do that. Racism is illogical and to be rejected. So centrist position, racism is illogical and to be rejected on the basis of being idiotic. Yeah, I already spoke about that. Gender theory is garbage. That's what I think. That's what I think the centrist position is. And I've already gone through that a little bit in a little bit more nuance. I think that people can be men but have very feminine thoughts and feelings, but you're still men, and people can be women and vice versa. But I think overall this idea that you're born in the wrong body is toxic and is a terrible thing to say to children. It's hard to imagine a worse thing to say to children. You're born in the wrong body. It's like you're fundamentally broken. And then we need to change your genitals through surgery to make you okay again. What a horrible ideology. Let's start saying it. Support for LGB, right? So support for LGB, basically. Lesbian, gay, and bi. Fully support. Critical race theory is garbage. It's basically racism dressed up as anti-racism. Books like White Fragility are just complete nonsense. I remember when I was in a corporation and the CEO put it on the book list and I read it and I thought, and this is the person who's in charge. So yeah, nonsense. Let's get rid of that. Critical race theory. All right, next. So one of the core tenets, all right, meritocracy and equality. So it's we don't discriminate on the basis of ethnicity, don't discriminate on the basis of sex or gender in any way. But at the same time, we don't look at outcomes and go, we need to force equal outcomes. So meritocracy. And then equality of outcome and racism and sexism is, so equality of outcome is racism and sexism rebranded. I've already said that. More, there is some truth in diversity being a strength, but it is diversity of thought and experience, not based on ethnicity. So that's an interesting one, right? Because when people talk about diversity on the left in contemporary life, it's all about ethnicity. It's not about diversity of thought, actual diversity of thought. It's like you have to have exactly the same thoughts. You have to be a leftist. You have to be a libtard. You must be. And so no diversity. It's not diversity actually at all. Yeah. So if you have a diverse opinion, you get cancelled. So, right, next, there are differences among groups and they may result in unequal outcomes. I've already said that. Migration policy should serve the existing population. So in my opinion, the centrist position on migration right now is that the migration policy should serve the existing population that's in the country. It should have an extremely high bar for entry. People should come to the country who are really the best and the brightest, not, the kind of, I think a lot of the time politicians say that, but then they just press the button of migration because it grows GDP, and then they're like, oh look, we're doing really well economically, even though GDP per capita is falling. But really, like, we actually have to get comfortable with GDP falling, honestly. So to finish with legal migration, it should be open to anybody. So you see these red lists, right? That people will say, well, we should ban everyone from that country. No, I don't agree with that. I think that it should be a really high bar, and then if people can pass that high bar and they come and they contribute, fantastic, doesn't matter where they're from. And that's the difference, right? That's a non-racist policy. So then on illegal migration, this is a much more difficult one. I feel quite strongly about this because I have an illegal migrant hotel quite close and I've seen it firsthand. I'll tell my story soon in a video coming up. My opinion now is that basically it's hurt our society so badly that we need to shut it down completely. Shut it down fully and completely. 100% closed off. No more refugees, no more illegal migration whatsoever, and we should basically close that down. I think that when you have, maybe, in future, maybe we can relook at it, yeah? But we're at the point now, in my opinion, where it's so harmful. I think that Overton window over allowing racists to get more vocal, ethno-nationalists more vocal, is driven to a large extent, or to some extent at least, by this complete insanity of illegal migration that we are allowing to happen we are allowing this to happen in our country. Our politicians are allowing this to happen. So it's just be shut down. I think that if we wanted as a country to do like a Ukraine style thing, homes for Ukraine, or the Hong Kong thing, then there should be a referendum across all the people. Switzerland do direct democracy quite often. Why don't we just put it out to the people? And then with a number, right? So this number, right? Put it out to the people. It's our country. Why does it always have to be a blank check? Okay. So then you could vote on it, right? Also, within my view, and I think hopefully what's centrist, is that nation state, shared identity and culture is vitally important. So it's really important that we have a shared identity, but that identity doesn't just apply to one ethnic group, and it applies to the whole country. So I think that people who are here should have that connection that undercuts everything. If they have a different religion or a different ethnicity or a different age, doesn't matter. Even different political opinions on the left and right. We need to have this nation state ethnicity, this identity that cuts across, that everybody feels really strongly, and it needs to be preserved, cherished and protected. And I think it's super important, and it should be the case that people coming into the country need to integrate into that culture and need to embrace it. I think we do have a lot of people here who've come from other countries who, don't like British culture at all, don't identify with it, and that's a major problem. Okay, so I've done my best to outline centrism. Whilst I talk, I'm going to put up a little image, an overview of what I think, that will list all of the different categories, all the different areas, and what I think about them. I think that this is centrism. That's what I think. But I'd love to know. I'd love to know what you think about it. Do you agree with this or not agree with this? I'd love that feedback, because honestly, it's quite difficult to know. But that's my current best shot at outlining what centrism currently means. Okay, I went on a bit of a rant there throughout the whole video. Anyway, I hope it was entertaining. I hope that it was interesting and entertaining, maybe. I'll give you some ideas, some people who I think are kind of centrist commentators, largely. Konstantin Kisin from Trigonometry, I think he's a centrist overall. This one might be a bit controversial, but Joe Rogan, I think Joe Rogan is. Yeah, so sometimes he has guests from the right, but also the left. He was a leftist for a long time, I know, because I've been following him since before he was famous. So I would say him. And then there's a YouTuber who just sprung to mind, Shoe on Head. Shoe on Head, great name. So I think she is centrist. Bill Maher, I think. He's a bit more left, but I would say overall centrist, pretty much. Piers Morgan. I think Piers Morgan is actually overall pretty centrist, pretty centre right now. And then lastly, Ricky Gervais. I think Ricky Gervais is... He basically makes fun of both. He's clearly from the left, but rejects all of this extremism on the left. So I think him, and probably J.K. Rowling as well. And I could go on, right? But yeah, so there's some examples. All right, thanks so much for watching. Maybe some of it resonated. Maybe I'm completely off the mark. Either way, I'd love to know what you think. In this one in particular, I really would love feedback, because I went through, this process of trying to figure this all out. And it's kind of like, it's just so difficult to know. I think the voting patterns and the polling that I've looked at, overall, I think that, it kind of lands in this. But we hear so much from the far left, we hear so much from the far right, it's so vocal, but overall, I feel like this is kind of the central position right now. And maybe it's just me saying some of my views. Anyway, okay, I hope you found that entertaining and interesting, and thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.